I had to get on Twitter first because nothing happens unless it happens on Twitter. Shame on all of you for coming here today. During a virtualization day, you're learning about a superfluous topic, but that's okay. It should be pretty good.
We came to see you, Paul.
Okay, so if you can see the tiny window on that giant screen, I have a very short presentation. What I really want to do is do some Windows 8 demos, and I want to answer questions that you folks have. So please do feel free to interrupt as necessary. Once again, I want to remind you there are, in fact, virtualization-related talks occurring today, right now, in other rooms. So don't forget about that. I know that Dan Stoltz is doing a talk on Scott, I think, 2012, System Manager. Okay. I, however, will be talking about Windows 8. So as you probably know, Windows 8 was recently released as a pre-release milestone consumer preview. We might think of it as beta. There will be a release candidate at some time this year and then the final release of the program. So the types of things I wanted to discuss today are here on the screen, and since you can't possibly read that, I will tell you what they say, basically. I kind of want to talk a little bit about the background of Windows 8, how it came to be what it is. What it is today, what I feel like is the central dilemma to Windows 8, which is the dual nature of its user experience. Talk about those two user experiences, the new Metro environment, as well as the classic desktop. Discuss the 3 or 4 business features that are new to this release, because there really aren't that many. And then discuss how Windows 8 will impact the future of Microsoft's many platforms, including not just server, but also phone, and then various new devices they'll be releasing in the future as well. So, as I just mentioned, the consumer preview was released about 10 days ago, 10, 11 days ago, I guess. How many people have downloaded, installed, loving it? How many people love Windows 8?
Yeah.
Anybody? All right. Hopefully I can change your mind on that one. I think Windows 8 is pretty cool. There's some interesting stuff going on just with the installation of this, by the way. So for you traditional folks or people that want to install Windows 8 in a virtual machine, you can, of course, download ISOs like before. 32-bit, by the way, will give you dramatically better performance in a virtual machine. This is a heads up. But they're doing a web-based installer for Windows 8. And I think for non-PC bundles, in other words, people who acquire Windows 8 some way other than getting it with a new computer, the web-based installer may ultimately prove to be the most popular method of doing that. It's actually very cool, and there are some huge advantages to using the web installer. It integrates 2 previously separate tools, which are very useful: the Upgrade Advisor and also the Windows Easy Transfer tool. And that's the tool that lets you do the migrations. So you do a clean install and then bring back your settings and data and so forth. Those things are integrated into the web installer, not possible with a clean install or a upgrade install with an ISO. The other thing that's built in is it will map your product key to your user ID. So when you log in, purchase and download eventually, you won't have to enter your product key. It doesn't seem like a big idea or a big deal, but I've installed this thing so many times now that when I do a regular install off of an ISO, I forget that I have to do that. So I come back from lunch or whatever, and it's just sitting there waiting for the product key, and you can't skip it like you could in Windows 7. So, and then you think, well, wait a minute, now where is that product key? You know, where do I find it? So, kind of a nice, just a nice addition. I've actually written a ton of things about the consumer preview already. I'm finally starting to slow down. I think I brought our web server farm down to the ground actually 5 times. And we had some astronomical number of page views. It's very exciting. Only one person here actually likes Windows 8, but you know, it is obviously a big deal for the industry. It's very clear that it's an exciting topic. So I'm also working on a book about Windows 8 called Windows 8 Secrets. I was writing part of that. Behind you early today was freezing to death in the back room, which is why I'm shaking, not because I'm nervous. So this is what Mary Jo Foley calls inside baseball, which I think is kind of a fun term, but I had some interesting series of discussions with folks from Microsoft pretty high up who told me a very interesting story as kind of background. So without telling the names of the people who are involved, I think this would be interesting for you just because it tells the story of how Windows 8 came to be what it is. Because the original plan for Windows 8 was for Windows 8 just to be an evolutionary play like Windows 7. It would just be the next version of Windows. And while I understand that a lot of the IT prototypes actually kind of hoping that that's what Windows 8 would be. I think I could make the argument that it was clear that people were assuming they could start touching everything. And so one of the higher ups at Microsoft called back to Redmond and said to his team, listen, you need to get down here and look at this. There are fingerprints on everything. And they decided at that time that they were going to change Windows 8 to adopt this new method of interacting with a computing device, and then turn it into something that was simpler and, yes, more iPad-like. You know, that they would make a version of Windows that could run on an iPad-type device, be applicable for regular consumers. When this decision was made, there was a big contingent at Microsoft that didn't want the Windows team to go in that direction. They felt that they already had a good system in what became Windows Phone, but even before there was a Windows Phone, there was a group working on Silverlight-based technologies, touch interfaces, device-type things, and so forth. And they thought that they should split these products into two different things, that there could be a device OS, like Windows CE, like Windows Phone, that would run on these new tablets. It would be like iPads, and that Windows would evolve the way it always had. And clearly, those guys lost. Some of them left the Windows team and so forth. That group was kind of scattered to the winds, frankly. But Microsoft has gone in the direction it's gone in. You know, if you follow along with the Twitter type discussions or the online forum discussions, there's been a lot of arguments from people, power users such as yourself and so forth, who think that Windows 8 is changing things a little too much, and they worry about, you know, where the shutdown command is, or why isn't the start button there anymore, and so forth. And I think the sad fact is that while I understand why people have issues with that stuff, as we do with every version of Windows, Windows 8 is the way it is. I mean, I don't think at this point we're going to change the direction they're going on. They've been working on this thing for 2 years. So what we see here is a near final version of this OS. And they absolutely want our feedback, but saying, I'd like you to go back to the desktop on, please, you know, something that's probably not going to happen. So looking at Windows 8, and we're going to look at it in a moment if you haven't seen it, it's pretty obvious right away that there's something really strange going on. It's not a cohesive single interface. You know, for years and years, I mean, since Windows 95, where they introduced the desktop user interface, the Explorer shell, the taskbar, the start button, and all of those interfaces that we all know and love, Windows has sort of evolved from that. And they added Glass and Windows Vista, but essentially, it's the same exact user interface. In Windows 8, that interface still exists, but we have this new Metro-style user interface, the full-screen start screen, the Edge UIs, as they call them, the full-screen Metro-style apps, and so forth. It's an environment that is especially good for touch-based devices, but also works, if not very well, then at least well, on traditional computers too. But clearly was designed for these touch devices. And so you get into this weird situation where I think Windows is going to split, and even though they haven't had these two different systems, they're essentially going to have two different types of systems that are based on the same exact code base. And I think that people who use tablets or other hybrid type devices are primarily going to exist in that new Metro environment because it's very friendly and iPad-like and it works that way. And then people who have large monitors or are in a workplace and use traditional applications like Microsoft Office or Photoshop are going to continue to exist in the desktop. And there are a lot of weirdnesses to it. I don't know how much of this you can read depending on where you are in the room, but I sort of think about it like Metro is for consumers, it's for the fun things, it's for touch, it's for immersive experiences. Desktop is what Windows has always been. It's been for work. It's for sitting at a keyboard and typing and doing spreadsheets and programming and doing those kinds of things. I think the one advantage that Microsoft has when you compare it to something like what Apple is doing with the iPad, where they have two separate systems, an iPad for that type of stuff that's evolving up the chain a little bit, but it's still very much a consumer device, and then the Mac, which is a more of a traditional computer, keyboard, mouse, or trackpad, and not so much touch on the screen, is that with Windows at least, you can combine those things. So it's going to be possible during the lifetime of this operating system to buy a tablet that looks exactly like an iPad, walk around with it, watch movies, play games with your hands, and so forth. But when you get to work or at home, you can dock it into a docking station, keyboard, mouse, 30-inch screen, desktop comes up, Microsoft Office, Photoshop, and so forth. I think that's going to be compelling for people, you know. And for workplaces that are already deploying iPads and iPhones, Android devices, using things like Exchange ActiveSync, you get a certain level of manageability that works across all device types, and that's fine for certain things. But when it comes to managing devices, I don't think that there's anything like a Windows PC for just the sheer level of granularity of what it can do, way beyond Exchange ActiveSync. And so when you tell a workforce that you can give these people tablets that they're going to love, beautiful, colorful, and fun, just like an iPad, but it's a Windows computer, and you can really lock that thing down and really go to town with it with policies and so forth. I think that's going to be compelling for people. So you have to kind of put up with the two-headed nature of the thing, the weird beast, that is Windows 8, because it does do both, and it is a little weird. But I think that the advantages that you get on the other side may hopefully, for Microsoft certainly, outweigh the cons of that, because it is a little convoluted. So Microsoft, curiously, doesn't actually give this thing a name. In other words, we know that the Windows desktop is the desktop. We know that in previous versions of Windows, the shell, the user interface was called Explorer, Windows Explorer. In this new environment, we have a new runtime engine, which is literally the OS. It's not Explorer anymore. That's called the Windows Runtime, or WinRT. On top of it, we have these user interfaces. Microsoft calls them, annoyingly, Metro style. They don't have a name. In other words, I can't say, they say it's Windows, this is Windows. So I think of it as Metro. I think that's just the simplest way to say it. The physical embodiment of Metro to most people is going to be the start screen, but really there's a lot more to it than that, because obviously there are the applications that run on top of the start screen, or run on top of WinRT, more specifically, run on top of Metro, if you will. There are interfaces that invade on the sides of the screen. These also come up on top of the desktop as well. System-wide things, notifications, contracts and charts and so forth, which we'll look at, file pickers and so forth. It is the OS. It's a new model. It's a new way of doing things. And there are advantages to it just as there are disadvantages. These things cannot run in windowed form on top of the desktop, which is one thing I think a lot of power users would like to see. Talking to Microsoft about that, I was told that there are reasons for that. That Metro is designed to be a sandbox system where the applications all run isolated from each other. There is no code invasion that can occur between them. There's no real sharing of information other than through something called a contract, which I'll show you, which is essentially a blind way of sharing, sort of like the Windows clipboard, if you will, where the things at the either side of this contract don't know anything about the other thing. That you as a photo app, for example, could share a photo, you share it out. You don't know what happens to it once somebody grabs it, but on the other end, you might have, say, like a mail application that could also receive the share and then do something with that, send it in an email or whatever. It's a completely different way of doing things. And they were saying that basically, at least for this version, when they looked at putting this in a windowed form, there was no way to protect the application or the start screen from code injection and from other attacks. And so that this is basically just a full screen experience. It goes back to the point I was making in the previous slide, where it just creates this system where there are two different things. You can have Metro style apps, you can have Windows applications, traditional Windows applications. You can run them sort of side by side, by which I really mean at the same time. But it's a little jarring and strange to go from a full screen app like an iPad type app to a task manager window, like a little dialogue, or a Windows application like Word. They don't really mix and match very well. People will do it, and you certainly can do it, but I do think they're going to remain separate. So rather than talk about it, let's just take a look. So, and actually, let's see if I can display that right. So this is the lock screen, right? This is what you'll see when you boot up. Windows 8 computers actually boot up in seconds. I believe this computer probably boots in about 12 or 15 seconds. I think it's what it takes. It's just this one actually is a Core i5 processor type system. If you're familiar with Windows Phone, I'm sure none of you are, but Windows Phone is a beautiful and elegantly designed system. You'll look at this lock screen and say, I've seen this before, because it looks a lot like the version that comes on Windows Phone, just oriented in more of a landscape style. Obviously time and date and so forth, but you also get these notification possibilities, including some fairly rich notifications. There isn't one here, but it's, oh, actually there is one there, I'm sorry. Next to the 329 is a calendar entry for this actual event. So that's an example of a rich notification where you don't just get the number of unread emails, you get information about your next appointment in that case. The system I'm using here is keyboard mouse, right? So it's not touch. And one of the big changes that Microsoft made in the consumer preview was that they made this system more accessible, a lot more accessible, keyboard and mouse. So in the developer preview, the touch stuff all worked great. In this version, all the keyboard and mouse stuff works, but everything I'm doing here you can also do via touch. Another new thing in Windows 8 is that you can optionally log into if you would normally log in with a workgroup style, a local account, you can log in with a Windows Live ID instead. You don't have to, but if you do, you get a lot of advantages for syncing settings and documents and so forth through SkyDrive to all of your different PCs. So the lock screen style I had, the background color, the desktop wallpaper you'll see later, all of the settings are all actually synced between computers. So if I were to bring up a new computer, log in for the first time, that stuff would all come right down to the computer. You'd have everything, you'd be up and ready to go. There are new login types as well. In addition, normally you would log in with whatever my password is for my Hotmail account, but you can optionally log in with a PIN, which is what I'm doing. So it's a 4-digit kind of a login, and then there's an optional picture password as well, which I will show you. So here's where you configure the lock screen, and you have all the various lock screen apps that I was showing you. Oops, I'm in the wrong place. Why am I doing this, you ask? So I can create a picture password. And if you log in with your account, I can basically choose a picture. I'm not going to configure this because it's a little more difficult on the, this is a bad example. It's a little difficult on a non-touch screen, but if you were to pick this picture of my kids shopping for a Christmas tree, what you basically do is you create some gestures on top of the photo. I usually poke my kid's eyes out and give a little smiley face, which drives them crazy. But it's a nice personalized thing. So in other words, picture you like comes up, unique gestures on the screen. It's just a unique way to log in. Likewise, on a device, you have to think about when you log into a smartphone, and hopefully you do log into a smartphone and not just have it come on. You can configure it with a 4-digit PIN. I actually like using a 4-digit PIN because it's easy. It's probably totally insecure, but I just find it to be kind of a nice, simple way of doing things. So again, like Windows Phone, Windows 8 offers this, what they call its Metro style UI, this start screen with these live tiles instead of static icons, right? So if you think about your Outlook icon on the taskbar in Windows 7, it can have a little number there that tells you how many emails you have. But the Mail app, which is this green tile down here, actually cycles through the recent messages and gives you a little bit of the message. So from this dashboard, essentially, just in that one app, you're seeing a lot of stuff that you would normally have to go into the application to see. And so when you combine that with all of the other application tiles that can also portray similar information, it becomes this dynamically created scene. And frankly, for someone my age, it's almost a little too much. There are things you can do on a per tile basis to turn off some of this stuff. I feel like I'm going to have a stroke sometimes, when every tile is going in a different thing. So I've actually turned some stuff off, but you can see some of the things are animating. So the green tile up there is the calendar tile, same thing. Photos tile, messaging tile will do this. People tile will also do it. You could configure this thing to be very, very dynamic. But if we just go into an app, and I'm taking a chance going to my Mail app, but let's see if there's anything embarrassing there. No, you can't see it. Okay, so there you go. So see if anyone's criticizing me here. So it's a nice Metro style app, and I know that sounds like kind of a nebulous thing to say, but having been using Windows Phone for a while, I look at the apps that they built into here, Mail and Calendar, People, and so forth, and I think this is very familiar to me because I use Windows Phone, and I know from using Windows Phone, literally for about 2 years now, that this type of interface actually works really well. It's just a nice UI. The thing is, they're full screen, right? So there are ways that you can multitask. If we have other Metro style apps running, there's a switcher interface here. We can use the traditional Alt-Tab, Windows flip environment, of course. And then they have various edge UI. So if I move the mouse up to the corner there, you get a kind of a back UI. That will go back to the previous app. If I move the mouse down the screen, that switcher UI I showed you earlier comes up. And because we're on the start screen, there's no start at the bottom. Likewise, on the right, they have this system of charms. These are system-wide features like contracts and settings, essentially. And these edge interfaces, which are triggered by hotspots with the mouse. There's keyboard shortcuts for all of them, obviously also with touch, edge UIs, are available everywhere. So if you're on the start screen, if you're in a Metro style app, if you're on a desktop and you have all kinds of apps running, these things are always available and they're system-wide. So I already showed you settings. Although I will say that the interesting thing about settings is that it's context sensitive. So from the start screen, what we see at the top are settings related to start, and at the bottom are the system settings that are always going to be there. So if we were in an app, for example, I can go back to mail and trigger settings. The settings you're going to see at the top are related to mail. So this is the new system-wide way of doing settings, essentially. So it's consistent across applications now. Some of these are actually pretty nice looking. I'm not, it's fantastic. I'm not connected for some reason. So some of these are really nice looking. You'll have to trust me on, unfortunately. I don't know why I'm not online. Let's see if this one's come up. Yeah, I got this little icon. I probably don't want to troubleshoot this one. Let me see.
Can you flip between the two interfaces, Metro and Standard?
Yes, yeah, and I'll show you that in 1 second. Yeah, the chapter of the book I was working on was about the desktop. I was actually surprised to discover there was a lot to write about. Obviously, in a system like this, they spend a lot of time working on the new stuff. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Most of the past 2 years were spent on this. And I think you can make the argument that when you think about Windows, if Windows needs any help, it's with consumers, right? I mean, the business stuff is right there. It's great. And I think a lot of the arguments against Windows 8 for business users are, hey, you don't need to change anything. It works fine. What are you doing? But the interesting thing is, with a few small exceptions, everything from Windows 7 is still in Windows 8. Plus, it has this kind of crazy, tablet UI right on top of it as well. So there's a little bit of adjustment, but essentially speaking, it's a superset, right, of Windows 7 still. So if you think about updating Windows and what the needs are and where they need to spend their time and effort, it makes sense that they would spend more time on this than they would on the desktop. Yeah.
You mentioned that these apps run in sort of a sandbox. But that be configured so that the user can play and install and do whatever they want with these, but in the domain account, they still can't install Windows apps, and that's what the board is doing.
Yeah, so actually, I have a slide about, I don't have many slides, but one of the few slides I have is about the business features. And there's kind of a Trojan horse feature going on here that I actually think will be very compelling for businesses. And that is that all of this stuff is controllable via policy. So one of the things you could do for a business user is say, hey, look, you need these 5 applications to get your job done. And maybe I get that you want to go on Facebook or whatever, so you allow that as well. This interface, the start screen, could have just those tiles. It would be literally a custom tailored dashboard that would only include the apps they need to get their job done. And so you could cut off all the stuff you didn't want them to have, provide them only with the access you want. Obviously, with something like that, it can be used for evil as well as good. I mean, how you manage your environment is up to you. But it is very interesting that I think we're going to see some really nice interfaces like that. I also should note that this interface is available on server. Interestingly, on Windows Server 8, when you boot in now, it actually does go to Server Manager, not to this. But when you log in via remote desktop, it goes to this. And one of the things that they're creating are custom dashboards based on the start screen that have just the management UIs that a delegated admin would need to get their job done. So when they log onto a server over using RSAT, like the remote server admin tools, right? They will, instead of hitting like a remote desktop, you get the full server, they're going to have a remote experience that will actually come up into a start screen with just the tools they need. Same theory, and arguably makes a lot more sense in the context of server management. Yeah.
I've noticed on the client side, we use that big to publish our shortcuts and stuff.
Yeah.
So we put on a machine, the the trial one. And I noticed that now we don't have to stop. We have about 400 or 500 shortcuts on that.
Oh, yeah.
So has there been any thoughts to that?
Yeah. So one of the, I just happened to write about this because I was writing about the desktop. If you install something like Microsoft Office, right? On a Windows 7 PC, when you install Office, it finishes, and then nothing, right? You go into Start Menu Search, or maybe they put a couple things in the most recently used list, and that's how you discover stuff from Office. But the truth is, Microsoft Office installs like 17 icons in the Start menu somewhere. You can go in and you can find them all. The Start menu doesn't exist in Windows 8, so where do they go? They go to the end of the Start menu, the Start screen. Yeah, I have not played with the deployment tools to know if that's something you can configure. I'm imagining it would have to be, but as an end user, when you install something, the first thing you want to do is go look at the end of the Start screen and see what kind of junk is down there. So if you install like Google Chrome, one icon, easy. Visual Studio, Microsoft Office, some of the Adobe tools, it's like this explosion of icons. And it's all this stuff that it's always been installed, you just didn't know it was there, but because this is the new interface, all of a sudden you see it. So that's one of those new things we're just going to have to deal with, unfortunately. I'm sorry? All right, so a traditional Windows application, a regular Windows application, you would work like icons.
You can with your right click one, you can delete it or remove it from.
Yeah, you can remove it, but you can't change the way it looks. You can't make it bigger or smaller. It's just static. That's just not as many configuration options. Yeah, so right, you can do it well. Right. So a little harder on this kind of screen. You can drag things around. You can drag them into a new group. You can name the groups. You can do things like that. It's pretty customizable. Obviously, you can do personalizations like that. Background patterns and colors and so forth as well. Yeah.
Is it like application added movie mode?
Yeah. So that works exactly as it does today. The only difference is it's a Windows 7 option, but it's really, I haven't tested. There's one app that didn't work for me in the developer review that now that I'm thinking about it, I haven't tested here, so I'm curious about that one. But by and large, if it runs a Windows 7, it runs here. So I'm guessing the application compatibility stuff isn't going to be as necessary, or in the cases where you do need to use it, it would be just like doing it in Windows 7. For Metro style apps, everything goes to the Windows Store. Oops, sorry. So the Windows Store, if you're familiar with the way an app store works in a mobile device, like an iPhone or an iPad, the Android marketplace, whatever, it's basically the same thing, meaning that you will find, download, buy, they have trial versions or will have trial versions, and then also update. So in other words, you're doing the full app management through this interface. Of course, it's Microsoft, so they understand. In fact, I have an update. I can update an application. How exciting. So Microsoft understands that businesses need a way to do this securely in-house, so they're going to have an interface where when you log onto a domain, you go to the store, they can also control what you see there, and they can just show their own apps, in-house apps, line of business apps, whatever it is. So they'll have that capability there as well. But, years ago, one of the big promises around Microsoft Update, back when, if you think back before Microsoft Update, Windows Update debuted, I want to say, with Windows 98, and it was a website, right? And then at some point, they brought Windows Update into Windows as an application, and Microsoft Update became the back-end service. It still is today. Over time, they added non-Windows applications, right? SQL Server, Visual Studio, Zoom, whatever. All that stuff is in Microsoft Update. So this is kind of that central clearinghouse for all that stuff. And the promise of Microsoft Update was that one day we're going to extend this thing to third parties, Adobe and so forth. And they never did. I think the reason they never did was because they basically can't trust these people to do it right. So in the Windows Store, this is basically the fulfillment of that promise in the sense that these applications, everything that will be curated by Microsoft, they'll be known to be safe before they're put out in the world. They'll be subject to the same rules as any other mobile store. You'll be able to install them on up to 5 PCs. And should there be a problem, if one of the apps is discovered to have an issue, Microsoft will be able to pull it and literally pull it off of people's PCs, which a lot of people have described as a kill switch. But that's the way the iPhone works today. It's the way Kindle works today. It's the way all these kind of cloud-based app stores or online stores of all kinds work. So it's consistent with the model that we see with the iPad, the iPhone, and so forth. So, are there any other questions just around the general Windows 8-ness of Metro and so forth? Yes.
If you could have
I'm sorry.
Did you do a email line? What number do you get?
Yeah, 6.2, I think. Let me, I'll go to the desktop afterwards, we'll do that. Yeah, and the reason I do that, 6.2 or 3, I can't remember where we're at anymore. So 6.60 was what, Vista, 6.1 must have been 7, 6.2, I guess would be 8. The reason I do that is just for application compatibility for APIs. Yep.
Are all apps and utilities that you use in today's desktop environment strictly available through the store?
No.
In other words, you can't go out and pull your.
Yeah, so, all right, so the Windows Store the Windows Store will display applications that are Metro style, as well as Explorer type applications like traditional apps. The difference between the two is that in the cases where a third party wants to sell an Explorer type app like Microsoft Office or Adobe Photoshop, that purchase won't go through the store. You'll be offloaded to their website, and you'll do that from there as you would normally. The reasons are that they can't have the same control over those types of apps. You know, Microsoft can't go to Adobe and say, look, we know Photoshop costs like $900, but you have to let them install it on up to 5 PCs now. You know, Adobe's not going to go for that. So traditional Windows applications can be installed, downloaded normally. There's no restrictions. It's the way it always was. And the way the store will work is that Microsoft will allow third parties to advertise them there, but not sell them through the store. They'll have to go outside of the store to get them.
I'm just thinking of some of my favorite open source utilities that I use.
Yeah. Let me go to the desktop because I can see there's a lot of questions around the desktop. But let's see if I can figure out how to navigate in this system. So just as far as the desktop goes, conceptually speaking, the Windows 8 desktop is an app. It's not actually an app, not technically speaking, but for all intents and purposes, it's treated like an app, and I'll show you why that is the case. It's not the operating system anymore. It's not the underlying operating system, that's for sure. It's basically the same as the Windows 7 desktop with a couple small exceptions. Yeah.
How many of the apps are cloud apps?
The apps in the Metro Store? Actually, the vast majority of them probably integrate with cloud services, I would say. There's it's kind of an interesting distinction between what's in Windows 7 and what will not technically be in Windows 7. So the Windows Live type apps, mail, calendar, people, photos, music, video, and so forth, almost certainly will not be part of Windows 8. You'll get them on a new PC typically, as you get Windows Live Essentials today, or you can download them for free from the store. But each of those apps that I mentioned, let me just make sure that's true. Yep, all of them integrate with live services, right? The calendar app would be absolutely useless without being logged into a Windows Live ID or connecting to a Gmail calendar or an Exchange calendar, right? It doesn't work as a local calendar. So it's not necessarily true that they all have to be, but I think the vast majority I've seen so far are connected to online services. Yes?
In Windows Vista and 7, I've gotten to love the search window. I can't find it.
Okay, I will show you that. That's there. It's still there. The desktop functionally is exactly the same. So, you know, you can connect to the web, you can download things, you can run shell extensions, you can add plugins to your browser. It works exactly the same. So it's all the same. They've updated some stuff or improved some things. So there's a new version of Windows Explorer that has a controversial ribbon-based interface, which is actually pretty good. New version of Task Manager, which is excellent. There's a new file copy experience, which is also excellent. So, you know, if you were to start multiple file copies today, you get multiple little windows all over the place. The more you add, the slower it goes and so forth. They've cleaned that up. The one window now handles file collisions really, really well, much more obvious than it was before, and the performance is much better than it was before. Let me just make sure I'm not forget. Oh, Smart Screen. If you're familiar with Internet Explorer 9, they have a feature called Smart Screen, which protects you against inadvertently downloading malicious files. Smart Screen works really well. It's a little bit like the way Windows Defender or what's it called, Microsoft Security Essentials works, in that there's sort of a reputation service built on the back end that uses heuristics, but also feedback from people who download a file, get the message that says this is suspicious, and then say, no, this isn't suspicious, I know what this is, and they say, okay, and it uses that to determine or to help determine whether files are suspicious. Smart Screen works really well, but not everybody uses Internet Explorer. So in Windows 8, they've added it to the shell. So if you download a file with Chrome or Firefox or whatever, you bring in a bad file with a USB memory stick or a external storage device of some kind, it will protect you in that same fashion. And let me just see. Integrated support for ISOs and VHDs. So if you use a file image for ISO, typically we burn that to DB. Actually, I'll just show you that instead of talking about it. But it integrated now into the shell. So this is the Windows 8 desktop. It looks almost exactly like the Windows 7 desktop. The big change is down in the left-hand corner. There's no start button, right, which caused a lot of people to freak out. But the reason they did that is they now have a consistent start experience, they call it. So if you move into that corner, the start tip comes up. And if you click that, that goes to start, because this is the start menu for all intents and purposes. I know it's a screen, but
There's a hack to bring it back, by the way.
we're not going to talk about that. So there's also kind of a cool power user menu down here. One of the problems with the new, when you don't have a start menu, it's like losing a limb. You forget how to do things otherwise, right? So typically a Windows desktop has the recycle bin and that's it, right? So I mean, confronted by that fact, I actually on the system I don't have it. So I mean, what would be the quickest way to get to control panel from here, like right now? Like how would you do it?
Windows key, control, and
Search, yeah. I mean,
Typing that in, right?
personally, I would go to Action Center because it's on the thing, and you can get to it that way. Control panel like that.
On the right hand, those settings, and you can get it.
There's a million ways, right? But so one of the things they added was this right-click menu was sort of a throwing out a bone to the power users, where they have those control panel and those other kind of power user features are at least accessible. There are other ways, by the way.
how do you invoke that? Right click over in that corner?
Yeah, you move down to the corner until the tip appears like that, and then you right-click and it pops up. You can obviously you can go personalize and then add those icons. You can add the control panel as well. There's lots of ways. The point was just that they added that little capability. The other big difference is the shutdown thing, right? So shutdown is one of the things that where is it? So it's actually shutdown is if you go over to the right side. Let me do that again. Oops.
They gotta make that work better.
Actually, it works fine. I think it's because I'm doing the display thing. I'll just use the keyboard shortcut. Windows key plus I, right, brings up the settings interface. So settings on desktop has desktop settings at the top, like you would expect, but it also has these system-wide settings, so power is right there.
What about sleeping?
So if you click power, they have different options in there. So it seems like
No hibernate.
no hibernate. Yeah, so new power management modes in Windows 8, which are designed for these devices. So the default for this thing is that you close it, and it does, I forget the exact name of it. It's a new sleep state, but when you open it up, it will come back, generally speaking, less than 2 seconds. It's actually very quick performance, and I think they had to get rid of hibernate for that. The trick,
So is that a sleep?
it is a sleep. It's a new form of sleep.
Sleep hibernate.
It is literally a hybrid of sleep and hibernate, yes. So one of the problems with hibernate is that the more RAM you have, the slower it is, right? So a lot of people have like 8, 16 gigs of RAM, like hibernate takes like, that's longer than rebooting a computer. And Windows 8, obviously they want to make everything fast, so they basically got rid of hibernate as a default choice. Let's see, we had questions about the desktop. What were they? Let me just show you some of this stuff. So this is the Ribbon Base Explorer. I do want to say, obviously it's big and it's ugly and everything, but the way that this is going to ship out of the box is going to look like this. And so if you compare this to the Windows 7 Windows Explorer, this is actually just about the same size, if you will. But for beginners, there's a lot of nice, a lot of choices in here and so forth, and different interfaces that you get from doing different things. If you double click on, this is an ISO file. So if you double click on this thing, in Windows 7, it launches that burning tool, right? That will burn it to disk because that's the only thing you can do with it. In Windows 8, it does 2 different things. First, it adds it to Explorer as a drive letter. It just takes the next drive letter, and it allows you to navigate into it. And there are 2 implications to this. You can add and remove files, so you can modify it live, and you can actually run this thing. So if you wanted just to run whatever that thing was, like if you had an ISO for Office, you could run Office setup right off this, never expand it, never burn it, never do anything else with it, just do it right out of the file. That's pretty nice. VHDs work exactly the same way. In fact, I'll just show you that. Oops, I see I do it. I still go to start like an idiot. It's not there anymore. So if you go into find a VHD file, this is a Windows 8 VHD. Same deal. When you go in, you can navigate into it, live updating and so forth. You can actually change the VHD live. The difference between this and an ISO is that to the system, the VHD appears to be a fixed disk, not a removable disk. And the reason that's important is because you get all access to all these excellent disk tools with that. So you can do all kinds of things. Like you could defrag this thing, you could do all kinds of stuff with it. Yeah, it's pretty good. And my messenger window is up for some reason. So you will see things from Metro over the desktop. There's that back experience. If I move that down, I'm going to get the switcher again, just like normal. The start is obviously a Metro type thing. The charm axis here, obviously the Metro experience. Settings, notifications, of which there are two types. System-wide notifications, if you plug in a USB storage device the first time, it'll say, what do you want to do with this? It's a Metro UI, because the Metro stuff is the OS. It's the, it's the OS, it's handling it for Explorer. This switch over, I think you can draw parallels between the switch over between DOS and Windows when that happened. I think this is a similar progression, so it's going to probably become more seamless over time, but that's the basic idea there. And actually, the other thing I just wanted to point out was this new task manager. So it's very simplified by default. It mixes and matches Metro style and traditional Windows apps. You can kill Metro apps from here. I mean, you don't actually have to, because Metro apps sleep automatically and suspend and then disappear. I mean, they work like smartphone apps. So they'll, according to the available RAM and resources, they'll run and do whatever they do, like little hobbits or whatever. But eventually they'll be shut down automatically by the system. And that's one of those kind of things that's superior about them compared to regular apps. Yes?
Does Control Plus work?
Control Plus, what is, I don't know, what do you mean?
Zoom.
Oh, Zoom. You mean in, where would you use Control? You mean in just a document or?
No, in Internet Explorer.
Oh, yeah, right. So, yes. Sorry. I can, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I see what you're saying. You want me to, okay. I have 2 minutes left in this presentation, so unfortunately. Sorry, I don't understand your sarcasm, sir. I forgot I was home. There are some cool task manager features in here. They have kind of a heat map on this stuff. So now if you want to like pivot it on memory, you can see which applications are using the most memory. And they've returned the ability to modify the startup applications. This was never in Task Manager, but it used to be in Windows Defender. So this actually makes a little more sense, I think, in Windows, in Task Manager. And so they've added that here as well. So I'm probably, yes, am running out of time. So are there any other Windows 8 questions you may have? I didn't discuss virtualization. I should, since it's virtualization day. Windows 8 does include client Hyper-V. In fact, I have it installed. It is Hyper-V 3, so it's the same version of Hyper-V that is included in Server 8.
How do you find it?
You have to install it, so it's in Windows features.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, sorry, let me search some of that. So,
Does that allow a Metro interface for that?
no, all right, so, not exactly. This interface obviously is the exact same as in Server. There's a new Metro version of Remote Desktop, and you can remote desktop into a Hyper-V based, and that's actually a good way to do that. Before you ask another question, you asked me about Start Menu Search, right? One of the coolest features of Windows 7, you hit the Start button, you type. If you can't find something. In other words, you have an application you use sometimes, but not all the time, so it's not pinned to your taskbar, like Notepad or Paint or whatever, right? So you Start button, N-O-T-E, it appears in the list, hit Enter, and you go, right? So the way that works in Windows 8 is exactly the same. It's just that it's a full screen experience because that Start menu is now the Start screen. So if I want to find Notepad, Start menu, start typing, and the full screen search experience comes up. It's actually a lot, even though it's kind of a weird full screen thing, and if I just hit Enter, I can run, Notepad runs. But to go back to that, they have this filtering capability over the side. And so there are some obvious things, like you can search for apps. And actually, you asked about, like, how would you install Hyper-V, right? Yeah. So I know it's in Programs. It's something like that. So if I type in Program, the only app that comes up is Default Programs, but that's actually a control panel, right? So it's a setting. So I can look in here. Now, the way they've separated this out is that first column where the little tooltip came up is for the Metro style PC settings interface. But then the rest of it is control panels. You probably can't read it, but up here is Programs and Features. And somewhere in here will be, maybe I just typed in the wrong thing, but we'll go to this. I can do it from here. There's a way to get to it directly, but Windows features, and then you'll see Hyper-V is in here. That would be how you find that. So that works like it did before. It's just a full screen experience. But back to this filtering. So you can filter by apps, by settings, by files, but also by Metro style apps, because search in Windows 8 is a contract. It's an underlying feature of the operating system. It's something in Metro style apps can take advantage of. So you could search for, I have searched, I can just do this. I could search for note in mail, which is what it's doing. So it's looking through my mail, and one of the mails that has note in it is actually about this event, interestingly. So that's kind of a unique capability now, right? That search can be extended by apps, and it will get better as you install more apps. So if you install like a Kindle app from Amazon, you could type a note and search for that within the books you have in Kindle if they support that feature. It's pretty cool. Yes.
XP mode.
XP mode. All right, so XP mode was a feature of Windows Virtual PC, which doesn't exist in Windows 8, although I suppose, I haven't tried it, but I would imagine it probably runs. As of today, there is no version of that for Hyper-V that I'm aware of, right? So Microsoft has other tools that provide XP mode-like capabilities through their various virtualization products. I would imagine they're going to be doing something like that, because the goal with client, usually the goal, unless you're testing or a software developer or whatever, if you're just an end user, the goal of using virtualization on the client is you want to run an application that doesn't natively run in the host OS, right? So you want to run IE6 for some reason, and you want to run XP. And what you want to do is go to the start menu, just run the app and have it pop up. That's what you're saying. So in this version of the OS that doesn't exist, but I have to think they're going to be doing that. It's such an obvious thing.
None of the CADs running on tape.
None of the CADs, yeah. No, not yet. Yep.
User account control settings and like run as administrator or something.
So if you log in as a, so actually I'll just do start menu search. I can show you what that looks like. If you log in as a Windows Live or what they call like a Microsoft ID now, you don't have those capabilities anymore. You are an administrator. But if you go to user accounts, there's no way to administer that from this interface. You probably can't read it, but what it says is make changes to my account in PC settings. So what that will do is load this interface. And so you only have the very small handful of settings that are available. If you log in as a local account, it's exactly the same as it was in Windows 7. Yeah.
What about versions?
Of
All one version of it?
Of what?
Ultimate versus.
Oh, they haven't said yet. There'll be different versions, definitely.
I heard 9.
I don't think that was accurate, but they're definitely. I think it's going to be less than was the case of 7. But meaning, if there were 7 versions of Windows 7, there'll be 6. You know, they seem to like multiple versions, but they haven't said officially. I'm sorry, you got
My question was with the memory. I was reading some forums and someone had posted that Windows 8 was supposed to use half the memory to start up like Windows 7.
Yeah, well, I don't know that it's half, but Windows 8 is a lot more aggressive across the board with resource use and so forth. So actually, this is probably very subtle, but if you look at this, it'd be easier if you had a Windows 7 system next to it. Even these Explorer windows don't use the same level of graphics capability. They're actually slightly less translucent, if you will, so they're not as sophisticated, right, as they were in Windows 7. But the flip side of that is that they don't impact the battery life as badly, and that's the point, right? And so they've done a lot of performance tuning in Windows 8 across the board, not just for just the memory or resource footprint of the thing while it's running, but also the number of things that it's loading. You know, there's a lot of delayed loading you can do during startup to speed that up. But one of the things that's really impressive about this OS is how fast it boots from a cold stop or a reboot, or obviously it does the instant on thing. There's a PC refresh feature and reset feature where you can blow away the computer, bring it back into a fresh factory, fresh state, or with all of your settings and apps and so forth still installed. That stuff takes, in some cases, just a single-digit number of minutes. It's very, very fast. So I don't know half, but it's far more efficient now than Windows 7.
Does Snap Windows still work?
Oh, I didn't show you the best feature. Yeah, so in this mode, the old version of Snap still works, like this, right? So that works. But there's a new version of Snap, and it works with, let me just load a cooler application. You can have 2 things side by side if the resolution supports it. Hopefully this one does. So for example, if I go, I'm holding this in an unnatural way. So I can snap, say, the calendar application next to the desktop, right? Now, for a Metro style app to do what that thing is doing there, any one of them can do it, but that display looks intelligent, right? It clearly is snapping to the size. The application has to support that. Calendar is one that happens to. You can have two things side by side. You can only one of them can be the desktop. You could have two Metro apps side by side. You can switch the sides, and actually I believe it's afraid to show. Yeah, there you go. I can switch which is which, right, like that.
How are you doing that?
And you can also have, let's see, oops. I can't tell you, it's a secret. No, it's sorry, it's Windows key plus period, or Windows key plus shift plus period to do what I'm doing here. So you can snap to the right, snap to the left. There's a primary, secondary display. They can both be Metro apps. I'm not doing a very good job of showing you that, but if I were to load, say, people, there you go. So now it looks like that. So, two Metro apps flipped either way. Desktop. Desktop is not very useful in this mode, but it kind of looks like the Alt-Tab interface. If you do that, it just gives you the thumbnails of each of the windows. And then if you click one, it goes full screen. So. And I have to stop. So, sorry that was a little disjointed, but thank you very much for coming. And actually, I'll be up here for a few minutes. If you have any more questions and want to come up and chat, that's fine too. I'm not going anywhere.